Gather close, friends. Tonight I've got a tale so powerful it still gives me chills every time I tell it. A love born in blood and snow, strong enough to stand against an entire divided world, deep in the lawless mountains of the American frontier. Imagine icy winds howling through pine forests, a tiny cabin lit only by firelight, standing at the dangerous crossroads of fate and fury. Everything changed the moment a wounded stranger collapsed against that door, one fragile plea for shelter that set two impossible hearts on fire. Before we ride into this story, hit that like if you're ready, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? The cold Boston rain hammered the cobblestones like a judge's sentence as Liora Vale stood motionless at the tall window of her father's study. Her pale reflection stared back from the fogged glass, almost a ghost. Behind her, two men bartered over her future the way ranchers haggled over prize cattle at auction. "The wedding's set for 3 months from now," her father declared, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "That gives Vesper enough time to put together a decent trousseau. My son expects a wife who knows her place and her duties." General Locke answered, his words thick with unspoken meaning. "Draven has specific expectations." Leora's fingers knotted tight in the folds of her plain gray dress. She had met Draven Locke exactly twice. The first time he studied her like her father appraised timber, measuring her value down to the penny. The second time, at a garden party, she watched him backhand a servant for spilling a drop of wine. When she gasped, Draven turned that icy smile on her, a look empty of any kindness. "You'll learn soon enough, Miss Vale," he said quietly. "That discipline keeps everything in line, in every part of life." That same night, Liora made up her mind. It took weeks of careful planning. She quietly sold the small inheritance her late mother had left her, money her father never knew existed. She bought practical traveling clothes, tough boots, and a ticket west under a false name. Years earlier, her mother's sister, Aunt Maris, had written from Santa Fe, offering an open invitation Liora had never dreamed she'd need. That old letter became her only lifeline. On a fog-choked morning, while her father was at the bank, and Vesper sipped tea with the Ladies' Society, Liora Vale slipped out of the family brownstone carrying nothing but one worn carpet bag. She left behind silk gowns, leather-bound books, the grand piano, and the crushing weight of expectations she could no longer carry. The train ride west felt endless. Rail cars clattered across shifting countryside, lush green fading into endless golden plains, then jagged mountains rising like silent sentinels. With every mile, the iron corset of her old life loosened a little, though fear rode shotgun the whole way. What if her father realized she was gone before she reached safety? What if Draven came after her? What if Aunt Maris had moved? Or worse, passed on? Santa Fe offered both rescue and heartbreak. Aunt Maris had died the previous winter. Her little adobe house was already sold. But the lawyer settling the estate remembered her aunt's stories. "Your aunt spoke of you often, Miss Vale," he said gently. "She worried about you, locked away in that chilly Boston mansion." "Is there anywhere I could go?" Liora asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere I could vanish for a while." The lawyer studied her face, reading the truth she didn't quite say. "There's a place up in the mountains, about 30 miles north. Belonged to a trapper who passed last year. Remote. Real remote. Territorial office hasn't sold it yet. No roads worth calling roads. Rough country. You'd need supplies to last a hard winter." He paused. "You running from something, Miss Vale? Or running toward it?" "Both," she whispered. He made the arrangements, for a price that shocked her Boston-bred sense of money, but he swore was fair. Liora bought supplies, a sturdy mule, and rough directions to the abandoned claim. "Nearest town's 2 days' ride," he warned. Anything goes wrong up there, ain't nobody coming to help." "That," Liora said firmly, "is exactly what I'm looking for." The climb into the Sangre de Cristo Mountains peeled away the last traces of the woman she used to be. Her traveling dress turned stiff with dust and sweat. Her neatly pinned hair unraveled into wild tangles. Her soft city hands blistered and bled from leading the mule up rocky trails. Yet with every step higher, something new stirred inside her chest. Hope. When she finally reached the place, it was a weathered log and stone cabin tucked into a sheltered valley. Mountains loomed on three sides, their peaks already kissed with early September snow. A clear, icy creek rushed nearby, and the pines sighed secrets in the wind. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms joined by a wide stone fireplace, but the roof held tight, and the door still swung true on its iron hinges. That first evening, Liora stood in the open doorway, watching the sun set the peaks ablaze in gold and crimson, and felt hot tears cut clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. For the first time in her 23 years, she belonged to no one but herself. The weeks that followed shattered every notion she'd ever had about what she could endure. The cabin needed work. Gaps between logs wanted fresh chinking. The fireplace needed a deep cleaning. The little lean-to barn required patching to keep the mule safe through winter. She had never lifted a finger for real labor in her life, but necessity turned out to be a patient, unforgiving teacher. Her once pampered hands grew rough, calloused, strong. She learned to swing an axe, though her early swings produced more splinters than firewood. She learned to coax fires from damp kindling, to cook plain meals over glowing coals, to dry and store food against the long, cold months ahead. The overgrown vegetable patch behind the cabin yielded forgotten potatoes and stubborn herbs that refused to die. She cleared it inch by stubborn inch, and with every hard-won skill, the unfamiliar bloom in her chest grew stronger. The overgrown garden patch behind the cabin had turned wild, but Liora hacked through the weeds and unearthed forgotten potatoes along with tough herbs that clung to life like they had something to prove. The loneliness she'd once hungered for sometimes settled on her like a heavy blanket, pressing down hard. Nights inside the cabin fell into a deep, ringing silence, broken only by the sigh of wind through the pines and the distant, lonely howl of coyotes. More than once, Liora wondered if she'd simply swapped one cage for another, Boston's fancy prison of silk and silver for this raw, solitary cell she'd built with her own hands. But then morning would break, crisp and pine-scented, and she'd step outside into air that tasted like freedom itself. In those moments she knew, bone deep, she'd made the right call. October brought the first light snow, enough to dust the ground white by dawn, gone by afternoon sun. Liora pushed herself harder, sensing real winter breathing down her neck. She stacked cords of firewood high against the north wall until it nearly brushed the eaves. She hauled in the last of the garden haul. Squash, dried beans, bundles of herbs tied and hung from the rafters to dry. Silas Crow back in Santa Fe had warned her plain. Once the deep snows rolled in, she'd be cut off from the world until spring thaw. "You sure about this, Miss Vale?" he'd asked, eyes steady. "A woman alone up in those mountains. It ain't natural." Liora had given him a tight, determined smile. "Forcing a woman into marriage with a cruel man ain't natural either. I'll take my chances with the peaks." By mid-November, winter hit hard and didn't let up. Snow poured down for 3 straight days, blanketing the valley in a blinding, beautiful white that felt both peaceful and menacing. Liora built solid routines to keep the days from blurring together. Mornings, stoke the fire, cook breakfast, tend to the mule. Afternoons, whatever the cabin demanded, patching torn clothes, sorting supplies, losing herself for a spell in one of the few books she'd carried west. Evenings. Fix supper, settle by the hearth, and fight the memories that tried to creep in. She often pictured her father's fury the moment he realized she was gone. Had he hired men to track her down? Did Draven even care enough to chase her, or had her escape simply bruised his pride? And Vesper. Did her stepmother even register the empty chair at the table, or was she quietly relieved to have one less mouth to manage? Those questions circled overhead like winter ravens, but Liora shoved them back into the shadows. She'd chosen this path. Whatever came next, she'd meet it head-on, not as the dutiful daughter or the reluctant bride, but as Liora Vale, plain and simple. The big storm rolled in on a Tuesday evening in early December. She felt it coming. An eerie hush in the air, thick gray clouds piling up over the ridges like a wall. Liora hauled extra wood inside, filled every pot and bucket from the creek, and braced herself for days locked in. Snow began soft and slow, big lazy flakes drifting like goose down. By dark, the wind turned vicious, whipping the snow sideways in stinging sheets. She banked the fire high, crawled under every blanket she owned, and tried to sleep as the cabin groaned and shuddered under each blast. She must have drifted off, because the knocking jolted her awake, heart slamming against her ribs. For a heartbeat, she thought the wind had ripped a shutter loose. Then it came again. 3 solid, deliberate thumps on the door. Liora froze in bed, breath shallow. No one knew she was here. No one should be out in this blizzard. Her mind raced through nightmares. Had Harlan Voss found her? Had Draven tracked her down? Were there outlaws in these mountains who preyed on lone women? The knocking grew sharper, more urgent, followed by a low voice speaking words she couldn't catch. Hands trembling, Liora lit the lantern and wrapped a shawl over her nightgown. Silas had insisted she keep a rifle. It stood propped near the door, but she wasn't sure she could pull the trigger if it came to that. Still, she snatched it up, gripping it clumsily as she edged closer. "Who's there?" she called, hating the shake in her voice. The voice answered again. Strange syllables, then one word she recognized. Help. Her breath hitched. Outside, the wind screamed, and she pictured someone dying in the snow right on her step. But what if it was a trap? A heavy thud hit the door. Not a knock this time, but the sound of a body slumping against the wood. Terror and pity warred in her chest. In the end, pity won. Liora set the rifle down, slid back the heavy bar, and cracked the door open. The wind nearly yanked it from her hands. A man pitched forward into the cabin, bringing a rush of snow and freezing air with him. He caught himself on hands and knees, chest heaving. Liora staggered back, a scream lodging in her throat. He was Apache. She knew it instantly, though she'd never laid eyes on one before. Long black hair tied back from his face. Buckskin shirt and leggings soaked through, moccasins crusted with ice, and blood, dark and spreading across the leather from his left side. He lifted his head, and Liora stared into eyes black as polished obsidian. He spoke again in his tongue, then forced broken English through chattering teeth. "Storm. Lost. Need shelter. Please." Leora's mind went blank. Every dark tale she'd ever heard about savages roaring through her head. Travelers' yarns, blood-soaked newspaper headlines of raids and massacres, the smug, offhand prejudice that even Boston's finest parlor rooms accepted without question. She should bolt the door, snatch the rifle, end this right now, but the man stayed on all fours, snow pooling around him in dark puddles, blood dripping steadily onto her scrubbed pine floorboards. He made no lunge, no threat. In the lantern's warm glow, his face showed only raw pain, no menace. He looked young, maybe her own age, and in that instant he seemed heartbreakingly human, stripped bare by injury and cold. "Please," he rasped again, the word trembling on a shallow breath. Liora made her choice. She shoved the door shut against the howling wind, dropped the heavy bar into place, and turned to face the stranger now inside her home. "You're hurt," she said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "Let me help you." He murmured something in his own tongue. She thought she caught relief in the tone. Slowly, wincing with every move, he pushed himself up to sit, back braced against the door. In the lantern light, she saw him clearly for the first time. Tall even sitting down, broad across the shoulders, muscles carved from a hard life, skin gleaming like burnished copper. Fresh blood still seeped from his side. "I'm going to get water and clean cloth," Liora said slowly, enunciating each word as if volume could bridge the gap. "To wash the wound. Do you understand?" He gave one sharp nod, dark eyes never leaving her face. In them she read the same bone-deep exhaustion she felt in her own bones, and the same wary mistrust. Neither of them trusted the other one bit. Somehow that shared caution steadied her racing pulse. Liora moved fast, grabbing the wash basin, ladling hot water from the kettle by the fire, snatching clean strips of linen from her trunk. Her hands still shook, but purpose gave them direction. When she knelt beside him, he watched every move, but didn't pull away. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward his injured side. After a long beat, he nodded and eased his arm aside. The gash was deep but cleaner than the blood volume suggested. No ragged edges, no sign of poison. Liora cleaned it gently, thankful for the basic nursing her mother had drilled into her years ago. The man endured it in silence, though she saw his jaw clenched tight against the sting. "What happened?" she asked softly, working with care. "How'd you get hurt?" He seemed to catch her meaning more from tone than words. "Slide," he said, miming a fall with one hand. "Rocks, storm, come fast." Liora nodded, picturing him scrambling over icy cliffs as the blizzard slammed in. "You're lucky you found this place." A faint curve touched his mouth, almost a smile. "Lucky," he echoed, tasting the word like it was new. She wrapped the wound with firm, even strips of cloth, moving by instinct and memory. When she finished, she rocked back on her heels, suddenly struck by the sheer strangeness of it all. A wounded stranger in her cabin, a whiteout raging outside. And here she was, kneeling beside him, in nothing but her nightgown and shawl, like this was an ordinary evening. "I'm Liora," she said, touching her chest. "Liora Vale." He studied her face for a long, searching moment. Then he mirrored the gesture. "Kyle," he said. "I am called Kyle." "Kyle," she repeated carefully. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, at hearing his name shaped right on a stranger's tongue. Outside, the wind shrieked and rattled the shutters like it wanted in. Kyle glanced toward the noise, then back to her. "Can't go," he said simply. She understood. Neither of them was leaving until the storm broke. "No," she agreed quietly. "You'll have to stay." For a single heartbeat, they just looked at each other. Two souls from opposite ends of the earth, thrown together by bad weather and worse luck. Liora thought of all the terror that should be choking her right now. Instead, a strange calm settled in her chest. Something had shifted tonight, deep and permanent. What it meant, she couldn't yet say. "You hungry?" she asked, rising and extending her hand. After a brief hesitation, Kyle took it. She helped him stand. He towered over her, favoring his left side, but steady enough. She steered him to the chair by the hearth, then busied herself reheating the last of her supper stew over the coals. As she stirred, she felt his gaze on her. Quiet. Measuring. She realized he was sizing her up just as she'd been sizing him up, both of them peeling back old assumptions layer by layer. When she handed him the steaming bowl, their fingers brushed. He murmured something soft in his language. She guessed it was thanks, and ate slowly, careful not to jostle the bandage. Liora fixed her own bowl and sat on the low bench across from him. The fire snapped and popped between them while the storm battered the cabin walls. In this tiny outpost in the middle of nowhere, something impossible was beginning to unfold. She thought of Boston, of Harlan Voss's cold commands, of Draven Locke's cruel smile, of the life she'd run from. She thought of every ugly story she'd swallowed whole about the Apache, tales of brutality and terror. And then she looked at the wounded man sharing her stew, the man who'd said please and thank you, who hadn't once threatened her beyond the simple shock of his arrival. Maybe, Liora thought, the real danger in this world wasn't the unknown at all. Maybe it was the stories we told ourselves about it. The storm's gonna last at least a day, she said, mostly to break the heavy quiet, not really expecting him to follow every word. Maybe longer. You need rest to let that wound knit back together, Liora said, watching him over the edge of her own bowl. Kyle met her gaze across the rim, and there it was again. That faint, almost there smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Rest, he agreed in his careful English. Then go home. Home. The word drifted between them like smoke from the dying fire, heavy with meanings neither could quite put into words. Liora wondered where his home lay, whether people waited there, whether they feared for him lost in the whiteout. And she caught herself wondering if he wondered the same about her. Yes, she said quietly. Then you can go home. But even as the words left her lips, a small, honest part of her knew they weren't true. Whatever quiet thing was taking root here in this snow-locked cabin wasn't going to vanish when the drifts melted. She felt it as clearly as the fire's heat on her skin. Kyle finished the last of the stew and set the bowl aside. His eyelids drooped, exhaustion and pain finally winning the tug-of-war. Liora rose, gathered extra blankets, and pointed to the warm spot near the hearth. Sleep there, she told him. It's the warmest place. He understood the gesture and dipped his head in thanks. As he eased himself down onto the pile of blankets, moving slow and careful, Liora slipped into the small back room that held her own narrow bed. She lay awake a long time, listening to the storm's roar and the soft, steady rhythm of another person breathing just beyond the wall. She had run from Boston to escape a future someone else had already written for her. She had come to these high, lonely mountains hunting solitude and safety. Yet on this fierce winter night, she had opened her door to a wounded stranger who, by every story she'd ever been told, should have terrified her to the bone. But she wasn't afraid. Wary? Sure. Cautious? Absolutely. But something deeper than fear, deeper than logic, whispered that Kyle, whatever else he might be, meant her no harm. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. For now the storm howled on, and two strangers sheltered side by side in the dark, stepping, without knowing it, onto the first fragile thread of something neither had seen coming. Liora woke to stillness. The wind had died away, leaving a hush so deep it almost hummed in her ears. Thin, pale light slipped through the shutter cracks, the sharp, clean brightness that only fresh snow-reflecting sun could make. She dressed fast, conscious of Kyle in the next room. When she stepped out, she found him already awake, propped against the wall, blankets folded tidy beside him. He watched her cross the floor with the same quiet wariness from the night before. "Good morning," she said, her voice ringing too loud in the silence. "How's the wound?" Kyle touched his side lightly. "Better. Thank you." His English sounded stronger this morning, less halting. Maybe the fear that had choked them both last night had eased a little in the daylight. Liora moved to the hearth, stirred the coals back to life, and fed in fresh wood. "You hungry? I can fix breakfast." "I should go," Kyle said. She heard the resolve in his voice, but also the reluctance underneath. "Your kindness, I won't forget." Liora glanced at him, then crossed to the window and pushed open the shutters. The valley lay buried under a smooth, white sea that reached halfway up the cabin walls. "I don't think you're going anywhere today," she told him. "Look." Kyle rose carefully and came to stand beside her. He muttered something low in his own language. Maybe a curse, maybe just acknowledgement of the truth. "Much snow," he said in English. "It'll take days to melt enough to travel," Liora replied. "And your side needs more time anyway. You try climbing through that and you'll rip it open again." She saw the battle play across his face. Pride wrestling with plain sense. In the end, sense won out. "I will help," he said firmly. "I don't take without giving." "You're injured," she protested. He shook his head. "Small wound. I've had worse." He swept a hand around the cabin. "You have work. I have hands." There was a dignity in his tone, a quiet stubbornness that made her relent. "All right," she said. "But careful. If you tear that open, I'll be mighty cross with you." That ghost of a smile flickered again. "Cross?" he asked. "Angry?" Liora clarified, then found herself smiling back. "Yeah, angry." Days slipped by, and a rhythm settled between them. Liora had been right. The snow lay deep and showed no hurry to melt. They were snowed in together, two strangers learning the strange closeness of shared walls and shared silence. Mornings they tackled the necessary chores side by side. True to his word, Kyle helped. Wound or no wound, he hauled in armloads of firewood, fetched water from the half-frozen creek, though she saw the pain it cost him to plow through the drifts. He checked on the mule in the lean-to barn, making sure the animal had enough hay and shelter. Liora cooked simple meals and changed his bandages twice a day. She noticed how he took the pain without a single complaint, accepting her care with quiet, steady gratitude. His iron endurance struck her, worlds away from the Boston men who'd whine over a paper cut or a late supper. Words came slowly at first. Gestures, repeated phrases, patient listening. Kyle's English sharpened day by day. Liora picked up a handful of words in his tongue. She learned he was Chiricahua Apache, that his people followed old trails between the mountains of New Mexico and Arizona, paths their grandfathers and grandmothers had walked since time out of mind. One evening after supper, as they sat by the crackling fire, she asked the question that had been simmering. "You're a chief?" She'd noticed the way he carried himself, natural command, even here in this stranger's cabin. Kyle considered the word. "Leader," he said at last. "Small band. My father led before. Now me." Kyle turned the word over like a stone he'd just picked up from the creek. "Leader," he said at last. "Small band. My father carried the weight before. Now it falls to me." "That's a heavy load for any man," Liora murmured, her voice soft as the embers in the hearth. He met her eyes, and she saw a flicker of recognition there. Deep, quiet understanding. "You know this burden," he said. "Responsibility." Liora nodded slowly, memories of Boston rising like smoke. I know what it's like to run from the kind that would grind you down to nothing. Kale went still for a long moment. Then, gently, "What are you running from?" So she told him, halting at first, then in a rush, the cold expectations of Harlan Voss, the cruel edge of Draven Locke, the marriage she'd been sold into like a head of cattle. She held back the rawest wounds, the shame that still burned, but she gave him enough. When she finished, Kyle's voice came low and hard. "This man, he hurt you?" "Not with his hands," Liora said, "but I watched him hurt others. I saw the cruelty in him, the arrogance. My father didn't care. It was all business. Military contracts, power, alliances. I was just the payment." Kyle's jaw clenched tight enough to make the firelight catch the sharp line of it. "Among my people, marriage is different. The woman chooses. Family may offer guidance, but force?" He shook his head once, sharp. "That is not honorable." Liora gave a small, bitter laugh. "Your people sound wiser than mine." "Every people has wisdom," Kyle said quietly. "Every people has foolishness." He gestured between them. "You judged me by stories before I came here, yes?" Heat climbed her cheeks. "Yes," she admitted. "I'd heard terrible things about the Apache." "And I have heard terrible things about white people," he replied, voice even. "Many true, many not." His gaze held hers steady. "But you are not all white people. I am not all Apache. We are Liora. We are Kale." The plain truth of it hit her like a cold mountain wind. "You're right," she whispered. "I'm sorry for my prejudice." "You opened your door in the storm," Kyle said. "You helped a wounded stranger. That takes courage. That shows your heart." He touched his chest lightly. "I see your heart, Liora. It is good." In that heartbeat, something cracked open between them. A wall crumbling, a bridge taking its first shaky timbers. They were no longer just two people pinned by bad luck and worse weather. They were choosing slowly, carefully, to see one another plain and true. As the days stretched on, Liora found herself drawn deeper into the things Kyle knew. He showed her secrets of the high country she'd never have guessed on her own. How to read the sky for coming weather, how to dry meat so it lasted through the lean months, how to set simple snares for rabbits. He apologized for not hunting yet. The wound still kept him from moving fast or far. "When I heal," he promised, "I will bring you meat before I leave. Enough for winter." "You don't have to do that," she protested. "I want to," Kale said simply. "You saved my life. This is a small thing." In return, she taught him more English, word by word, and they fell into long talks that stretched late into the night. She spoke of books and music, of cities where buildings scraped the clouds and thousands lived shoulder to shoulder. He told her of sacred peaks, of stories handed down father to son for generations, of a life now pressed hard by soldiers and settlers who demanded they give up everything that made them who they were. "Soldiers push us," he said one evening, voice thick with weariness. "They say stay in one place, farm like white men, forget our ways. But how do you forget who you are?" "I don't know," Liora answered honestly. "It isn't fair. None of it. Fairness is like snow," Kale said, staring into the flames. "Beautiful to look at. Melts fast in the sun." Liora laughed, despite the ache in the words. "That's very poetic." "Poetic?" He tilted his head. "Beautiful words," she explained. "Words that touch the heart." Kyle's smile broke wide this time, changing his whole face. Warm, unguarded, startling in its brightness. "Then yes, I am very poetic." Their laughter rolled through the cabin like sunlight breaking through clouds, and Liora realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed so freely, without weighing every sound against who might hear. In Boston, laughter had been measured. polite, always watched. Here with Kyle, she could simply be. By the second week, the snow finally began to soften at the edges, patches of brown earth showing through. Kyle's wound was closing clean. Liora felt a quiet pride in her nursing. But they both knew the day was coming when he would have to leave. She tried not to dwell on the hollow feeling that settled in her chest whenever she thought of it. "Will you be safe here alone?" Kyle asked one morning, as they watched the sun scatter diamonds across the melting drifts. "I've been alone for months," she reminded him. "I'll manage." "Months before, you didn't know what you didn't know," he said seriously. "Now you know the dangers. Sometimes knowing makes them heavier." Liora caught his meaning right away. Back when she'd first arrived, her not knowing had been a kind of shield. Ignorance kept the fear at arm's length. Now, thanks to everything Kale had shown her, she saw the mountain's dangers clear as day. They'd be scarier with open eyes, but she'd face them anyway. "I'll be careful," she promised. Kyle spoke slowly, weighing each word like it carried weight. "If you ever need help, my winter camp is one hard day's travel west. Follow the creek till it forks, then take the north branch till you hit the red rocks. We stay there till spring." Leora's heart gave a sharp twist. "You're giving me directions to your camp? Why?" He looked straight at her, unflinching. "Because you might need it someday. Because—" He paused, searching for the English. "Because you matter now. To me. Your safety matters." "You matter to me too," she whispered. The words hung there, simple and raw. Something real passed between them in that quiet moment. Deeper than thanks, stronger than chance. They stood on the edge of something neither dared name yet, both knowing that putting words to it might make it too big, too dangerous. That afternoon, Kale set to work on the little fixes he'd noticed around the place. Liora tried to protest. His side was still healing, but he waved her off and climbed the ladder to nail down loose shingles, braced the barn door against winter winds, and split enough firewood to see her through another month. "You're stubborn as a mule," she told him, hands planted on her hips. A teasing glint sparked in his eyes. "I learned from you," he said, and the warmth in his voice sent a flutter straight through her chest. On his last night, she scraped together the best meal her dwindling supplies allowed. Thick venison stew from the last of the meat, cornbread baked on the hearthstone, wild onions she'd dried. They ate slowly, drawing out every bite, neither wanting to admit dawn would bring goodbye. Afterward, they sat by the fire like always, but the talk came in pieces tonight, weighed down by everything they weren't saying. "Will you go back to your family?" Kyle asked at last. "To Boston?" "Never," Liora said, voice firm as iron. "I can't go back to that life. I won't. But alone here, this is hard too. A hard life I pick for myself beats an easy one where I'm just a prisoner," she answered. Then softer. "You've made it less hard. These past weeks, I didn't even know how lonely I was till you showed up." "I will come back," he said quietly. "Spring, when the snows run off, I'll make sure you're all right." "You don't have to. I want to." He cut her off gently, echoing his earlier promise about meat. "If you want me to come." "Yes," she breathed, the word barely louder than the crackle of the flames. "I'd like that, very much." Their eyes locked across the firelight, and Liora felt the press of everything left unsaid, every hope, every fear. She wanted to beg him to stay, to close the distance, to tell her these feelings swelling in her chest weren't just wishful thinking. But fear kept her mouth shut. Fear of hearing no, fear of reaching for something that could never be. Kyle rose slowly. For one wild second she thought he might step toward her. Instead he said, "I should rest." Long walk tomorrow." "Yeah," she managed, though disappointment flooded her like cold water. "Good night, Kale." "Good night, Liora." She retreated to her room, but lay wide awake for hours, listening to his steady breathing through the thin wall, wondering if he was staring at the ceiling too, turning over thoughts he couldn't voice. Morning came cruel and fast. Liora fixed breakfast while Kyle gathered his few things. The snow had softened enough to make travel possible, though every step would still be a fight. He'd have to move careful to keep from tearing his side open again. They stood together at the open door as the sun climbed over the eastern ridges. Kyle looked down at her, and she saw her own tangled feelings mirrored in his dark eyes. "Thank you," he said, "for saving my life, for your kindness, for seeing me, not the stories you were taught, but me." "Thank you," she answered, throat tight, "for showing me strength and gentleness can live in the same man, for teaching me so much, for—" She faltered, words failing her. "For," he prompted gently. "For making me hope again," she whispered. "I didn't know I'd stopped until you reminded me what it felt like." Kyle lifted his hand, hesitated, then brushed her cheek with his fingertips. Light, almost formal, but the touch sent heat rushing through her whole body. "Stay safe, Liora Vale. Keep that rifle close. Check your snares every day." "I know," she said, smiling through the tears stinging her eyes. "Follow the creek north if I need help. Red rocks, I remember." "Good." He let his hand fall and stepped back. "Spring comes early up here. I'll be back then." "I'll be here," she promised. She watched him walk away, tall figure moving careful through the thinning snow. At the clearing's edge he turned, raised a hand in farewell. Liora lifted hers in return. Then he was gone, swallowed by the trees. The cabin felt hollow without him. She stood in the doorway a long time, staring at the empty spot where he'd vanished. The sensible part of her mind whispered warnings. He was Apache. She was white. Their worlds didn't fit together. She was a fool to feel anything deeper than gratitude. But her heart, quiet for so many years, had finally found its voice again. And it kept whispering the same stubborn truth. She wanted to see Kyle again. The long stretch of weeks until spring felt like an eternity. Something real and unbreakable had taken root in this little cabin during the storm, and no amount of melting snow could wash it away. Liora closed the door softly and leaned against the rough wood, letting the tears come at last, hot, silent tracks down her cheeks. She had run from Boston to escape a life someone else had mapped out for her. She never dreamed that in the heart of all this loneliness, she would stumble onto the chance for something honest, something true. But life, it turned out, had plans of its own. Outside, the snow kept thawing slow and steady, and Liora tried to picture what spring might carry on its wind. Winter dug in deeper after Kyle left. Liora threw herself into the daily fight for survival with fresh grit, using every trick he'd taught her. She checked her snares each dawn, and most days came back with a rabbit or two. She portioned out her stores with care, stretching them with the dried herbs and preserved food she'd put up last fall. But the long evenings by the fire hit different now. She'd gotten used to another voice filling the quiet, another heartbeat in the room. The silence she once craved now pressed in thick and heavy, sometimes hard to breathe through. She caught herself talking to the mule, telling it about her day like the animal might actually answer. "I'm losing my mind," she said one evening, patting the mule's warm neck. "Turning into that crazy old mountain woman kids scare each other with." The mule flicked an ear and kept chewing hay, utterly unimpressed. January piled on more snow and bone-deep cold. Some days the doubts hit hard, questioning every step that brought her to this far-off place. What if sickness came? What if the chimney caught fire? What if the mule went lame? Those what-ifs prowled like wolves just beyond the firelight, and she had to beat them back every night. Then February rolled in, and with it, an unexpected rider. Liora heard the hoofbeats before she saw the horse. She'd been hauling water from the creek when the sound froze her in place. Kyle had said his camp lay a day's ride west. Who else would brave these mountains in deep winter? She bolted back to the cabin, snatched her rifle, and took up position at the window. A moment later, a rider broke from the trees. Not Kyle, but an older Apache man, silver streaking his long hair. He reined in at a respectful distance and called out in thickly accented English, "Message! I bring message!" Her heart slammed against her ribs. She cracked the door just enough. "From who?" "From Kale." The man reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small leather bundle. "He sends this, says, 'Tell you be strong. Spring coming soon.'" He tossed the packet towards the door. It landed soft in the snow, wrapped tight against the wet. Before Liora could find words or thank him properly, the rider wheeled his horse and vanished back into the pines. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Inside the oiled leather she found strips of dried meat, perfectly cured and sealed, plus a small cloth-wrapped object at the center. She unwrapped it to reveal a wooden bird in mid-flight, wings spread wide, every feather smoothed to a silky shine. Someone, Kyle, she was sure, had poured hours into the piece, shaping it until it felt alive in her palm, graceful and free. That night she set the carving on the little shelf above her bed, where she could see it before closing her eyes. The message rang clear. She hadn't been forgotten. Kyle had sent food and a promise kept. Spring would come, and so would he. The gift carried her through the last brutal stretch of winter. When blizzards howled and the walls seemed to close in, she cradled the bird and remembered his almost smile, his steady strength, the way he'd looked at her that final morning with an expression she still didn't dare put a name to. March brought the first real breath of thaw. Snow pulled back from the south-facing slopes, uncovering brown grass and muddy patches. The creek ran swollen and fast with meltwater. Aspen buds swelled, and birds returned to sing at first light. Liora threw herself into spring chores with rising hope, scrubbing the cabin top to bottom, shaking out blankets to air, turning soil in the garden plot. She told herself it was just regular work, but deep down she knew. She was getting ready for company. The afternoon Kyle returned. She was out back turning earth with the shovel when footsteps crunched on the last patches of snow. She looked up, and there he stood at the clearing's edge, watching her with a look that stole her breath. He seemed different. Maybe her memory had softened the edges, or maybe the weeks apart had sharpened them. Fresh buckskin shirt stitched with fine beadwork, hair clean and loose over his shoulders, a pack of supplies slung on his back. He moved easy, no trace left of the limp. "Liora," he said, and the way he spoke her name, like it was something rare and worth holding, made her pulse stumble. "You came back," she managed, the words sounding foolish even as they left her mouth. "I said I would." He walked closer, eyes sweeping the cabin, the turned garden, then settling on her. "You well? Winter not too rough?" "I made it," she said, setting the shovel aside. "Your friend brought supplies in February, and the carving." She touched the spot over her heart, where she sometimes still felt the weight of that wooden bird. "Thank you," Liora said, her voice soft. "It was beautiful." Kyle searched her face, and she caught a flicker of doubt in his eyes, something uncertain that surprised her. "You liked it?" I loved it, she answered honestly. It's sitting right on the shelf by my bed. I look at it every single night. Relief and quiet pleasure warmed his expression. Good. I hoped. I wasn't sure a small thing like that would mean much. It meant everything, she whispered. They stood there, eyes locked, and the weight of those 4 long months crashed over her. The endless winter nights wondering if she'd dreamed up the pull between them, hoping and dreading in equal measure. I brought fresh meat, Kyle said at last, breaking the thick silence. Like I promised, I hunted for you, if you still want it. Yes, Liora said quickly. Stay, please, even just a few days. I'll stay as long as you want me, he replied, voice low and steady. That first evening felt both familiar and brand new. They slipped back into the old routines, Liora at the cook fire, Kyle tending the animals. But every move carried new weight. They brushed past each other with an ease born of practice, yet the air between them hummed with something sharper, deepened by months apart, and the knowledge that this time they were choosing it, not just thrown together by fate. Over supper they filled in the missing months. Kyle spoke of his band's winter camp, the lean hunts, game growing scarcer, settlers pressing closer to old trails every season. Liora told him about the rough days, the doubts that crept in like frost, and how his gift, the meat and that carved bird, had kept her going when the walls felt too close. I made something for you too, she said after the plates were cleared. She fetched a neat bundle from her trunk. I worked on it all winter, had to guess at the sizing. Kyle unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a shirt she'd sewn from the soft cotton she'd carried from Santa Fe. Simple, but carefully stitched. She'd embroidered the collar and cuffs with patterns she'd pieced together from memory, hoping they echoed the designs she'd seen on his clothing. Liora, Kyle breathed, fingertips tracing the neat seams. You made this? For me? It's not as tough as buckskin, she said, nerves making her words tumble. But I thought, maybe for summer, or I don't know. I just wanted you to have something from me. He looked at her with an intensity that stripped her bare, open, unguarded, seeing straight through. My people have a tradition, he said slowly. When a person makes clothes for another with their own hands, it carries deep meaning. It says, I think of you. I care about your comfort. I honor you. Oh, Liora said softly. I didn't know. I just wanted you to have something to remember me by. I don't need a shirt to remember, Kyle interrupted gently. Every day this winter I thought of you. Is Liora warm? Is she safe? Does she think of me too? Every day, she whispered. I thought of you every single day. The air in the cabin thickened, heavy with all the words they'd held back, all the feelings they'd been afraid to name. Kyle set the shirt aside, with care, then rose and walked around the fire until he stood right in front of her bench. I have to tell you something, he said. And after I say it, if you want me to leave, I'll go. I won't come back if that's what you wish. Fear squeezed Leora's chest. What is it? Kyle drew a slow breath. Among my people, when a man wants to court a woman, he brings gifts to her family. He shows he can provide, that he'll honor her. But you have no family here. No one to speak for you or guard your interests. He paused. So I speak straight to you, and hope I don't give offense. Leora's heart pounded loud enough she was sure he could hear it. Go on. I want to court you, Liora Vale, Kyle said, voice steady even as vulnerability shadowed his eyes. I want to bring you meat, help with your work. I want to sit by your fire and listen to your voice. I want to know that when winter comes again, you won't be alone, unless you choose to be. He gathered himself. I know the world outside these mountains would call this impossible, I know there are 100 reasons against it. Yes, Liora cut in. Kyle froze mid-sentence. Yes. Yes, she repeated, rising so they stood face to face. I want you to court me. I've spent months trying not to hope for this, telling myself it was just gratitude, just loneliness. But it's not. She searched for the right words. When you left, a light went out in here. When you walked back today, it came on again, bright as day. I don't care what the rest of the world thinks. I care what we say to each other. Pure joy lit Kyle's face, raw, unguarded, so bright it tightened her throat and made her eyes sting. Slowly, giving her every chance to step back, Kyle reached out and took her hands in his. His palms were calloused from years of hard living, warm against her skin, his hold firm yet careful, like he knew exactly how precious this moment was. I'll court you the right way, he said. No rushing, no assuming. You tell me what you want, what you don't want. Your choice comes first. Always. My choice, Liora repeated, the words tasting new and powerful on her tongue. Yes, my choice, and I choose this. I choose you. In the dancing firelight, hands locked together, Liora felt a certainty settle in her bones deeper than any she'd known before. This was real. This felt right. Whatever storms waited down the trail, they'd ride them out side by side. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that carried the quiet thrill of something just beginning. Kyle hunted every morning, bringing back deer and rabbits. He showed her how to skin them clean, how to cure the meat so it lasted, how to respect every part of the animal. They worked the cabin and garden together, and Liora marveled at how much lighter every chore felt with 4 hands instead of 2. But it was the small things that spoke loudest. The gentle brush of his fingers on her shoulder as he passed behind her, the way she found reasons to stand close while he mended a fence or split kindling. Their talks stretched long into the night, neither wanting to break the spell and head to separate beds. One evening, as the fire popped low, Kyle spoke of his duties. My people need me, he said, voice heavy with the truth. I can't stay here forever, even though I wish I could. There'll be times I have to go back to the band, weeks at a stretch. I understand, Liora said softly. I'd never ask you to turn your back on them. That would make you someone else, and I... She stopped, the word hanging bright and dangerous between them. Kyle's eyes darkened in the fire glow. Say it again. I love who you are, she whispered. I think I might love you. No, might, Kyle said, closing the distance until only a breath separated them. I love you, Liora. Not maybe, not might. I love you. Your courage, your kindness, your strength, the way you look at me. Not as an enemy, not as a savage, not as a threat, but as a man, as Kale. He cradled her face in his hands, touch reverent, almost awed. May I kiss you? In my ways, in yours. I don't know every rule, but I want to kiss you more than I want air right now. Yes, Liora breathed. Please. Yes. The kiss was slow, tender, full of held-back fire and deep respect. Leora's hands found his shoulders, anchoring herself as the world tilted and shifted, everything falling into place around this single moment. When they finally parted, both were breathing ragged. I've dreamed of this, Kyle admitted, forehead resting against hers. Since winter. Since the day I left. I've dreamed of you too, Liora said. Every night. They held each other close, and something deep inside Liora finally settled into place. This was home. Not Boston's polished ballrooms or crowded drawing rooms, but here, in the arms of a man who saw her clear and true, who asked before he took, who honored her choices, who made her feel both safe and utterly free at the same time. Over the next week, their bond grew in 1,000 quiet ways. Kyle taught her more words in his language, and Liora discovered she had a knack for picking them up she never knew she possessed. She taught him to read simple English, smiling with delight as he sounded out words from her few treasured books, slow and careful. They spoke of the future in cautious tones, facing the hard truths without letting them drown the present. Kyle's people were under growing pressure from the government, pushed toward reservations, told to give up the old ways. Liora would one day have to decide what to do about her own legal standing, whether she could truly disappear from her old life forever. "Those troubles are real," Kyle acknowledged one afternoon as they sat by the creek, water rushing high with melt. "But they belong to tomorrow." "Today," he said simply. "We're here. We're together. That's enough." "Is it enough for you?" Liora asked. "I can't bring you to my band as a proper wife right away," he said. "Some would welcome you. Others would fear you, distrust you. That's the truth." "But we don't need everyone's blessing to love each other," he continued. "We only need our own hearts." "And when winter comes again," she asked, "will you stay here with me?" Kyle was quiet for a long beat. "I have to spend time with my people. They need their leader. But I won't let you face another winter alone. We'll find a way." "We'll find a way," Kyle said, taking her hand in his. "Maybe one day you could come to winter camp as my wife, if that's what you wanted." Leora's heart jumped. "You'd marry me? Even with everything standing against it?" "Because of everything," Kyle corrected gently. "In my ways, we'd have a ceremony. In yours too, I imagine. We could honor both traditions, or make something new, just ours." He looked deep into her eyes. "But I'm not talking marriage yet. We court first. You have to be sure." "This life with me, straddling two worlds, it won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," Liora said. "You taught me that." As the days rolled on, Liora felt herself changing once more. She'd fled Boston a scared girl. She'd survived the winter alone and come out tougher. Now, with Kyle, she was learning what real partnership meant. Not ownership, not control, but deep respect and being truly cherished. They planned carefully, step by cautious step. Kyle would return to his band to meet his duties, but he'd ride back in 3 weeks. They'd spend the summer together, letting their future take shape slowly. When autumn arrived, they'd face whatever came next, side by side. "I'll tell my people about you," Kyle said. "Some will be angry, but they need to know what's in my heart." "I'll write to my aunt's lawyer," Liora decided. "There has to be a way to make my life here legal without tipping off my father. I need to protect myself and us." They harbored no illusions. The world beyond these mountains wasn't forgiving to love that crossed lines of blood and culture. But what they had was rare. Real love built on respect, trust, and the bravery to let someone see you completely. On Kyle's last night before heading back to his band, they sat on the cabin's narrow porch, watching stars prick through the deepening twilight. Liora leaned into him, his arm warm around her shoulders, and a deep peace wrapped around her like a thick wool blanket. 3 weeks, Kyle murmured. "I'll count everyone," she replied. "Stay safe. Keep that rifle handy. Check your snares." "I know," Liora laughed. "You've told me 100 times." "Then I'll tell you 101. He turned her face to his, expression grave. "You're precious to me, Liora. More precious than anything. The thought of anything happening to you." "Nothing will," she promised. "I'm not the scared girl who opened the door in that storm anymore. You helped me find my strength." "You were always strong," Kyle said. "You just hadn't seen it yet." They kissed beneath the emerging stars, and Liora memorized every detail. The warmth of his mouth, the solid strength of his arms, the steady thump of his heart against her palm. 3 weeks would pass. She'd endure them. Then he'd return, and they'd keep building whatever this was becoming. Morning arrived too soon. Kyle readied to leave. Liora didn't cry. She smiled instead, trusting his word now. As he rode off, she watched until he reached the clearing's edge, turned, and raised his hand. Not in farewell, but in promise. "I'll be back soon." The cabin felt empty after he left, but it was a different kind of empty. Not the hollow loneliness of true solitude. This was the absence of someone who would return. Liora poured herself into summer preparations, planting a bigger garden than she ever had, patching the barn properly, organizing supplies with care. She thought about their future with equal parts excitement and nerves. So many hurdles waited. Complications, dangers, people who'd never understand. But she'd learned something vital over the past year. Playing it safe had almost broken her spirit. Taking risks, choosing her own trail, opening her heart to what might come. These were the things that made a life worth the fight. 17 days after Kyle rode out, Liora heard horses coming up the trail. She grabbed her rifle and edged to the window, half hoping it was him early. Instead, she saw 3 white men on horseback, and ice shot through her veins. Even from a distance, she knew one of them. Draven Locke, her jilted fiancé, looking older, harder, angrier than before. 2 rough-looking men rode with him, the kind hired for dirty work. They'd found her. Leora's mind raced. The cabin had only one door. She could bar it, but that would only buy time. Draven and his men could surround the place and wait her out, or worse, set fire to the logs and smoke her out. She watched them dismount, noting their numbers, their weapons. Draven scanned the clearing with clear contempt, then shouted, "Liora! Liora Vale! I know you're in there! Your father sent me to bring you home!" Leora's hands tightened on the rifle until her knuckles went white. She cracked the door just enough to call back. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Draven. Get off my land. Leave." "You're not welcome here," Liora called back, voice steady despite the fear clawing her throat. Draven let out a laugh empty of any warmth. "Not welcome, sweetheart? You've been gone nearly a year. Your father's half out of his mind with worry. You really think you can hide out in this shack forever?" "This is my home," Liora said, iron in every word. "I left Boston because I chose to. I'm not going back." "You don't get a choice," Draven shot back, his tone turning cold and hard. "You're promised to me. That makes you my responsibility. I've hunted you for months, Liora. Did you honestly believe you could vanish? That I'd let you humiliate me by running off like some wild thing?" One of the hired men, Jericho, she thought, started toward the cabin. Liora swung the rifle up, barrel steady through the narrow gap in the door. "Stop right there. I know how to shoot this, and I will." The man froze, glancing back at Draven for orders. Draven lifted a hand to halt him, but his face darkened like storm clouds rolling in. "Let's be reasonable, Liora. You can't stay out here alone. It ain't safe for a woman. Come back to Boston. We'll have a quiet wedding, put this whole ugly mess behind us." "I said no," she repeated. "This is my home. I'm of age. I'm not bound to you or my father." "Your father is still your guardian until you marry," Draven countered. "The law's on my side. I can have these boys drag you out if I have to, but I'd rather not go that route." His voice carried the ugly promise that he'd enjoy it if he did. Leora's thoughts spun like a dust devil. She might hold them off a day, maybe 2, but then what? 3 armed men against 1 woman. No contest. Draven wasn't leaving without her. Her mind flew to Kale. He'd promised 3 weeks, but only 17 days had passed. He couldn't know she was in danger. The directions to his camp rang clear in her memory. Follow the creek to the fork, take the north branch to the red rocks. But could she make a run for it with Draven's men watching the place? "I need time to think," she called out. "Give me till morning to consider your offer." Draven traded looks with Jericho and Slate. "Fine," he said at last. "We'll camp right here in your yard. But Liora, if you try slipping away in the dark, we'll hunt you down, and I won't be near as patient next time." Liora slammed the door and dropped the heavy bar, heart slamming against her ribs. Through the window she watched them make camp, building a quick fire, spreading bedrolls, settling in like they owned the ground. One man always kept an eye on the cabin, making sure she couldn't sneak past. As night fell thick and black, Liora weighed her paths. She could give in, go back to Boston, and step right into the cage she'd fought so hard to escape. She could try to fight, 3 guns against 1 rifle, bad odds, or she could gamble everything on a desperate run. The choice hardened inside her as she lifted the carved bird Cale had sent. She hadn't fled Boston just to fold at the first real fight for her freedom. She hadn't survived a brutal winter and found real love only to let fear call the shots now. She would run. In the dark, she spent hours preparing. She packed a small bag, jerky, waterskin, flint, knife. She changed into her warmest, toughest clothes and laced her sturdiest boots tight. Most important, she draped herself in the darkest blanket she owned, ready to blend into the night woods. The moon hadn't risen yet when she quietly pried up the loose floorboard in her bedroom, a trick she'd built during the lonely winter months. The crawl space beneath was tight, just wide enough to squeeze through. From there she could slip out on the far side, away from Draven's campfire. It was a long-shot plan with a dozen ways to go wrong, but it was all she had. Liora lowered herself carefully, pulling the bag after her, then eased the floorboard back into place. The space was cramped, pitch black, smelling of damp earth and pine. She crawled slow toward the opposite side, every scrape and rustle sounding thunder loud in her ears. When she finally pushed through on the far side, she froze to listen. Voices drifted from the camp, Draven and his men talking low by the fire. The mule shifted in the barn, but she couldn't risk taking him. The noise would give her away. Liora moved like a shadow toward the tree line, placing each step with care to avoid snapping twigs. Her heart pounded so fierce she thought they'd hear it clear across the clearing. But luck, or something kinder, was with her. She reached the trees without a shout or gunshot. Once under cover of the forest, Liora broke into a run. Nightwoods were a nightmare. Roots snagged her boots, branches raked her face and arms, tearing at her clothes like angry hands. She had no lantern, no torch, only faint starlight slipping through the thick canopy overhead. But these woods were familiar now. She knew the creek's general course, the one that would lead her toward Cale's camp if she could just keep moving. Behind her, shouts eventually split the night, Draven and his men discovering the empty cabin. Liora pushed harder, lungs burning like fire, legs screaming, but she couldn't slow. She had to reach the water before they picked up her trail. The hours melted into a blur of terror, running until her breath rasped, ducking behind boulders or plunging into thick brush when hoofbeats thundered close, holding perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe as the riders swept past. Draven wasn't quitting. Dawn broke cold and gray, finding Liora miles from the cabin, stumbling along the creek as it twisted through rougher, rockier country. Her clothes hung in tatters, face and hands scratched bloody by branches, exhaustion dragging at every muscle like lead weights. Still she forced one foot ahead of the other. Kyle's directions rang clear. Reach the fork, take the northern branch to the red rocks. The sun climbed higher. Her pace dropped to a painful stagger. She'd brought food, but couldn't risk stopping long enough to eat. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit faded in and out, distant yells, the occasional snort of horses. Mid-afternoon, she finally hit the split in the creek. Relief crashed through her like a wave. She was on the right path. She turned north, climbing now as the ground grew steeper, rockier, more unforgiving. Exhaustion turned dangerous. She tripped often, vision swimming at the edges. Then came the thunder of fast horses. Liora tried to run, but her legs buckled. She fell hard, pain exploding through her ankle as it twisted under her. She looked back, Draven and one of his men bearing down fast. Liora struggled up, but her ankle collapsed. Terror and despair flooded her in equal measure. She'd come so far, fought so hard, only to fail at the very end. Draven swung down from his horse, face red with fury. "You stupid, selfish girl," he snarled, stalking toward her. "Do you have any idea the trouble you've caused? The money? The shame?" "Stay back," Liora warned, though she had no weapon and could barely stand. "You're out of your mind," Draven said, reaching for her arm. "You signed the engagement papers. Your father agreed. You don't get to just run off." "She is not yours." The voice cut down from above like a blade. Liora looked up. Kyle stood on a high rock ledge, and he wasn't alone. 5 other Apache warriors flanked him, all armed, all watching Draven and his man with stone-hard eyes. Draven froze, hand inches from Leora's sleeve. "This doesn't concern you," he said, though certainty had leaked from his tone. "This is a private matter between me and my fiancée." "She is not your fiancée," Kyle answered, English clear and cold as mountain water. He descended the rocks with smooth, predatory grace. "She is free. She chose her own path. You do not own her." "The law," Draven began. "Your law holds no weight here," Kyle cut in. "This is our land. It was ours long before your people ever set foot. You are the ones trespassing." He stepped between Draven and Liora, stance protective, threat unmistakable. "Leave. Now." Draven's companion had his hand on his pistol, but he was clearly calculating. 2 white men against 6 armed warriors on their own ground. The odds were ugly. "This is kidnapping," Draven tried, voice thinner. "Tell the army," Kale said. "Tell them you rode onto Apache land to take a woman against her will. See what they say." A smile touched his lips, but it held no warmth. "I think they might ask why you didn't go through proper channels. I think they might wonder about a man who has to chase a woman into the wilderness because she'd rather die than marry him." Liora watched the exact second realization hit Draven, rage and humiliation warring across his face, but he wasn't fool enough to start a fight he couldn't win. "You'll regret this," he spat at Liora. "Both of you. Your father won't stop looking. The Locke family has influence." "Then let them use it," Kyle replied calmly. "Liora Vale has broken no law. She is grown. She can live where she pleases. If her father has complaints, he can file them in territorial court." He paused. "But I think he'd hate for everyone to know his daughter chose the mountains over marrying the man he picked. Bad for business, yes?" Draven's jaw locked tight, but he had nothing left. He swung back onto his horse. His man followed. As they turned to ride out, Draven shot one last venomous look at Liora. She shrank against Coil. "You made your choice," he said coldly. "Live with it." Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading fast down the trail. As Draven and his men turned their horses, he twisted in the saddle and fixed Liora with a look so poisonous she instinctively pressed closer to Kale. "You made your choice," he said, voice like ice. "Live with the consequences." Then they were gone, hooves pounding hard back down the trail until the sound died away into silence. Liora waited until the last echo faded before her knees gave out completely. Kyle caught her before she hit the dirt, easing her down onto a flat rock nearby. "Liora," he breathed, her name thick with fear and relief tangled together. "When the scout rode in saying white men were at your cabin, when we saw you running, I thought I'd lost you forever." "How did you know to come?" she asked, voice trembling from shock and leftover terror. "You weren't due back for another week." "I couldn't stay away," Kyle admitted. "I told myself I was just checking on you, but the truth is I needed to be near you. When we spotted the men camped at your place and you were gone, I was afraid." He drew her close, arms strong around her shaking frame. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." Liora clung to him, letting the fear and exhaustion finally break over her. She buried her face against his chest and wept, deep, wrenching sobs, while he held her steady, murmuring low comfort in his own tongue. The other warriors hung back at a respectful distance, rifles ready, eyes scanning the trees in case Draven doubled back. When the tears finally ran dry, Kale gently checked her ankle. It was swollen bad, but not broken. "We're taking you to our camp," he said. "You can't walk on this. You'll ride with me." One of the warriors led Kyle's horse over. Kyle lifted her with easy strength, settling her in front of him before swinging up behind. She leaned back into the solid warmth of his chest, feeling truly safe for the first time since she'd spotted Draven riding into her clearing. The ride to the Apache camp took hours. Liora drifted in and out, worn to the bone. She caught glimpses of red rock canyons, secret valleys tucked between ridges, and finally a scattering of traditional wickiups nestled among the boulders like they'd grown there. Women and children stepped out to stare at the strange sight, their leader returning with a white woman in his arms. Liora felt the weight of uncertain glances and hushed whispers, but Kyle paid them no mind. He carried her straight to one of the larger wickiups and laid her gently on thick, soft furs. An older woman entered, speaking quickly in Apache to Kale. He answered with respect and warmth in his tone. The woman, his mother, Liora guessed, knelt and began checking her ankle with sure, practiced hands. "My mother, Tindra, will look after you," Kyle told her. "She's the best healer in our band." "Thank you," Liora said to the woman, who gave a single nod. No smile, but no hostility either. Over the next few days, Liora healed under Tindra's care. The ankle was wrapped tight and propped up. She drank bitter herbal teas that dulled the pain and brought the swelling down. Tindra stayed reserved but never unkind, bringing food, changing bandages, even starting to teach her a few Apache words here and there. Kale spent every spare moment with her, balancing his duties as leader. He told her his announcement about their relationship had split the band just as he'd feared, some curious and open, others deeply wary. But he'd made his stand plain. Liora was under his protection. Anyone who threatened her would answer to him. "Some will never accept me," Liora said one evening as they sat outside the wickiup watching dusk settle. "Some people never accept anything that shakes what they think they know," Kyle replied. "That's true everywhere, among every people. But others will judge you by what you do, not the color of your skin. Give them time." In the weeks that followed, Liora met the ones willing to give her a chance. There was Lark, a young widow who'd lost her husband in a clash with settlers and seemed to understand running from a forced marriage. There was Ember, an old man who delighted in testing her growing Apache words and chuckled at her mistakes. Children crowded close, touching her pale hands and hair with wide-eyed curiosity, asking questions their parents sometimes couldn't answer. It wasn't easy. Liora felt the weight of being an outsider, of carrying the shadow of the people who were dismantling this way of life. She pitched in where she could, helping with food prep, learning to weave baskets and tan hides. She messed up plenty, sometimes stepped on toes, but she kept trying, and she learned. Through it all, her bond with Kyle grew roots. Away from the lonely cabin, she saw him whole, as a leader, a son, a man steering his people through impossible times with quiet wisdom and iron will. She watched how his band looked to him, how he settled arguments with fairness, how he worked tirelessly so no one went hungry, how he balanced ancient ways against a world that kept closing in. About 2 months after her escape from Draven, Kale took her to a high overlook where the land stretched out forever. The sun dipped low, painting the desert in fire and gold. "I've been thinking," he said, taking her hand, "about us, about what comes next." Liora's pulse quickened. "And?" "I want to marry you," Kyle said plainly. "In our way and in yours. I want you as my wife, my partner. I want us to build a life that honors both our worlds." He turned to face her fully. "But I have to be straight with you. This life won't be easy." "My people face hard times," Kale said, voice low and steady. "The government leans on us heavier each year, demanding we abandon the old ways. There may come a day we have to choose, fight or give in." "I know," Liora answered quietly. "And the white world won't welcome you if you marry me." Kyle continued, eyes never leaving hers. "Your father, your family, they'll turn away. You'll be seen as lost, ruined. No road back." "I don't want a road back," she said firmly. "Everything I want is right here, with you." Kyle cradled her face in his hands, thumbs gentle against her cheeks. "You're sure? Because once we do this, we face it all together. The good, the bad, the easy, the impossible." "I've never been more sure of anything," Liora said. "I love you, Kale. I choose you. I choose this life." "Then I'll speak to my mother and the elders," Kale replied, eyes shining with emotion. "We'll have a ceremony. You'll become my wife." They kissed as the sun sank behind the peaks, two souls from separate worlds choosing to forge a bridge between them. It wouldn't be easy. They both knew that. But some things were worth every fight. Some love demanded every sacrifice. The wedding happened under a full moon 2 weeks later, a careful weave of traditions, honoring both Liora's roots and Kyle's. Tindra had softened toward her and helped prepare, braiding her hair with care and draping her in traditional beaded jewelry that caught the moonlight. Liora wore a dress she'd sewn herself, white in the style of her own people, but stitched with Apache patterns Lark had patiently taught her. Kyle waited for her in ceremonial buckskin, looking magnificent under the silver light. The whole band gathered to witness it. Not everyone looked happy, but no one spoke against it. Liora thought it was as much acceptance as she could reasonably hope for. The ceremony was beautiful. Prayers in Apache, vows spoken in both tongues, meaningful gifts exchanged. Kyle gave her a finely crafted knife, symbolizing his promise to provide and protect. Liora gave him a blanket she'd woven herself, representing comfort and home. When it was done, when they were bound by custom and choice, Kyle leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Now you are truly free. Free to be yourself, free to choose your path, free to love." "We are both free," Liora whispered back. The celebration stretched deep into the night, food shared, dancing under the stars, stories told around leaping fires, and a slow warming from those who'd been doubtful. Liora found herself laughing, real, unguarded laughter, surrounded by people who were, little by little, becoming her people too. That night, in Kale's wiki-up, now theirs, they finally came together as husband and wife. It was tender, passionate, filled with the deep love they'd built over months of truly seeing one another. Afterward, lying in Kyle's arms, Liora marveled at the long trail that had brought her here. "Do "Do you have any regrets?" Kale asked softly, as if he could read her thoughts. "None," she said. "Not a single one." The months that followed brought the hardships they'd expected. Kyle's band felt the territorial government's pressure tighten. Tense run-ins with settlers, hard talks with army officers, the constant battle to hold on to their way of life. But Liora and Kyle met every challenge side by side. She worked to make herself useful, earning respect through deeds rather than words. She became known for her healing skills, treating wounds and sickness with a blend of Tindra's teachings and what she'd learned back in Boston. She taught some of the children English, knowing it might one day help them face the shifting world. She labored alongside the women, contributing to the band's survival. In turn, Kale learned from her outsider's view. Her schooling and fresh perspective sometimes offered answers he hadn't seen. They became true partners, each making the other stronger. Spring returned, carrying news that squeezed Leora's heart. The letter she'd sent Silas Crow 2 months earlier finally arrived. Her father had searched, but the trail went cold after Santa Fe. Draven Locke had kept quiet about finding her, too humiliated by his defeat to admit it. Legally, Liora lived in a gray space, not declared dead, but effectively vanished. "I could claim my inheritance," she told Kyle after reading it. "My mother left me money my father can't touch. It's not much, but it could help. We could buy land, maybe on the edge of the territory, where we could live quiet and safe." "Is that what you want?" Kale asked carefully. "To step back into that world, even a little?" Liora thought hard. "I think we need to be practical. Your people's traditional lands are shrinking fast. But if we could get legal title somewhere, build a bridge between worlds, it might give us choices." They talked it over with the band's elders. The idea sparked debate. Some called it surrender, others saw smart adaptation. In the end, they reached a hard-won agreement. If Liora and Kyle wanted to try this path, they had the band's blessing, though not everyone's full enthusiasm. The process dragged on for months. Liora had to tread carefully through legal channels, never letting word reach Harlan Voss of where she'd gone. She worked closely with Silas Crow in Santa Fe, the lawyer who'd helped her from the start, proving her identity and finally claiming the inheritance her mother had left her, money her father couldn't touch. With that money, she and Kale bought a small ranch in a remote stretch of country where Apache territory bled into settler land. It wasn't much, rougher even than her original mountain cabin, but it was legally theirs, shielded by white man's law. Most important, its location let members of Kale's band camp there without technically breaking territorial rules. The place became a kind of sanctuary, a spot where two worlds could brush against each other without immediate sparks. Liora and Kale made their home there, but band members came and went freely. Slowly, cautiously, they started forging ties with nearby white ranchers willing to judge them as people, not as symbols of their races. It was never perfect. Prejudice cut both ways. Hostile glares from settlers, tense stares from Apache in other bands. Close calls happened, moments that could have turned ugly, but they held on, building something new from the broken pieces of their separate lives. 2 years after that first stormy night in the cabin, on a crisp autumn morning, Liora gave birth to a son. Tindra attended the birth, her skilled hands guiding new life into the world, while Kyle paced anxiously outside. When Tindra finally let him in, Liora saw tears glinting in his eyes. "A son," he breathed, cradling the tiny bundle with infinite gentleness. "He's perfect." They named him Thorn, meaning willow tree, the kind that bends with the strongest wind but never breaks. It felt right for a child destined to walk between two worlds. Thorn's arrival brought unexpected healing. Even the most doubtful in the band softened when they saw the baby. He was one of them, yet also hers. He carried hope, proof that the future didn't have to be all division and bloodshed. As Liora held her son, watching Kyle's tender care, she thought back over the long trail that led here. She'd fled Boston a frightened girl, desperate to escape a life laid out by others. She'd survived a brutal winter alone, discovering strength she never knew she had. Then a storm brought a wounded stranger to her door, and everything shifted. She'd been terrified that night, opening the door to the unknown, but choosing help over fear had changed the course of her life. It led to friendship, then love, then true partnership. It brought her to this moment, watching her husband hold their child, surrounded by a community she'd earned through patience, respect, and real effort. "What are you thinking?" Kyle asked, catching the look on her face. "I'm thinking how thankful I am that I opened that door," Liora said softly. "How grateful I am for every choice that led us here." Kyle gave her the full, warm smile he saved for quiet moments between them. "I'm thankful for the storm that carried me to your door, for your courage in helping a stranger, for your willingness to look past what you were taught to believe." "We've built something remarkable," Liora said, glancing around their modest home. "Not perfect, but ours." "Perfect's impossible," Kyle agreed. "But this is real. This is true." As seasons turned and years slipped by, their ranch became known as a place where different worlds could meet without immediate violence. It never got easy. Tensions between settlers and Apache only grew sharper, but they'd carved out a small space where love and understanding could breathe. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Quill, meaning owl, wise and watchful in the night, and another son named Riven, meaning sparrow hawk, swift and free. Each grew up speaking both languages, at home in both worlds, living proof of the bridge their parents had fought to build. Liora never went back to Boston. She never reconciled with Harlan Voss. Draven Locke eventually married someone else, and his family's influence quietly rewrote her story. She'd died tragically in the wilderness, a warning tale about foolish girls who ran from safety. Let them believe it, Liora thought. The girl who lived in Boston had died. In her place stood someone stronger, freer, more truly herself than she'd ever dreamed possible. On quiet evenings after the children slept, Liora and Kyle sat together watching the sun set the mountains ablaze. Those hard-won moments of peace reminded them why every struggle had been worth it. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't opened that door?" Liora asked one such evening. "I'd have died in the storm," Kyle said matter-of-factly. "And you'd have lived alone in your cabin, safe but lonely." "I'm glad I was brave enough to open it," she said. "I'm glad I was brave enough to knock," he replied, pulling her close. They had chosen each other across every wall the world could raise. They had built a life that honored both their heritages while creating something entirely new. And though the future stayed uncertain, as futures always do, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything since that storm-swept night when fear turned into possibility. Their children would carry the legacy forward, the truth that love can span any divide, that courage means choosing hope over fear, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open a door to the unknown and trust that what steps through might change your life forever. As the sun dipped below the mountains they both loved, Liora leaned her head against Kale's shoulder and smiled. Liora rested her head against Kale's shoulder and smiled. She had come west chasing freedom and found something far more valuable, belonging, not to a place or a people, but to herself, and to the man who saw her clearly, truly, without masks or expectations. And that, she thought, was worth every single risk she had ever taken. The end. Dear friends, as we reach the last page of Liora and Kyle's story, Maybe their journey reminds us of truths that hold true no matter the time or place. We all come to moments when fear whispers to keep the door shut, to stay safe inside what we already know. But what if the biggest blessings are waiting right outside that threshold? For those who've walked many miles, we know life seldom follows the map we drew. The straight road we thought was ours can dead end, while the rough trails we feared turn out to be the greatest adventures. Liora ran from a life that would have crushed her spirit. In doing so, she didn't just survive, she found real joy. Their love shows us that connection can spark in the most unlikely places between the most unlikely people. They could easily have been enemies. Their cultures, their pasts, their worlds stood miles apart. Instead, they chose to look past the stories they'd been told, to see each other as individuals, and to build understanding with patience and respect. And maybe most important, their story proves it's never too late to choose a different path. Liora was 23 when she fled Boston, but age doesn't matter half as much as readiness. Some find their true way young, others only after years of wrong turns and hard lessons. What counts is having the grit to take that step when the moment arrives. So as you think about this tale, ask yourself, what doors have I kept locked out of fear? What bridges could I build if I found the courage? What possibilities are waiting if I choose hope over habit? Remember, you're never too old to open a door to the unknown. You're never too set in your ways to learn something new. And you're never too alone to reach out to another soul who might change how you see the whole world. May you have the courage to knock when you need help, and the kindness to open the door when someone knocks on yours. May you build bridges instead of walls, and may you never stop believing that love can change even the hardest situations. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal/disclaimer. The stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice, imagery, and structure, but every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.